Hey guys, so I just finished the layout category of components for VerveUI, and I wanted to show you how I use these things and also a little bit of why I built it, why I built these layout components. So um, let's take a little tour um, for each one, and I'll show you how to use them and maybe some tips on you know when to use them, when not to use them, some things to keep in mind. All right, so we have a few. We have the container. Let's start with that one. The container is essentially the component that, well, contains the website, right? So to see this thing in action, we can actually click this checkbox and it will highlight the margins in orange, the padding in green, and the content in blue. Now, it seems like there's a single container here, but actually, that wouldn't be a good idea, right? It looks like it because they're all stacked vertically, but actually, it's not a single container. There's a few, so I'll show you. For example, we have one container. Let's see. So, for example, this is the grid, right? This is the main grid, which has, like, I can actually highlight this. It has the header up top, then which is this one, and this is a container. You can see the class container there. Then we have the breadcrumbs, then we have the body, and then down there we have the footer. Now, why should we do this? Why should we do things this way? Because if you have a single container that contains the entire website, so like if we flip this around and we had a container around this grid, and then the grid would be inside the container, and then the grid would have the header, the breadcrumbs, the body, and the footer, then we couldn't escape out of the container and do things like full width background sections on the website. So let me show you maybe an example of what I mean, make things a little bit clearer. I think I have an example here. Let me log out and go to create account, for example. I'm not sure if this is a good example. No, actually not. Oh, maybe it is. Hang on. Yeah, it is. This is a good example. So here, we still have the header, the body, and the footer down there, right? Maybe this is easier to see if I pull this to the side. Now the thing is, notice that the container is here on the header, right? It is not directly here on the body, but then it shows up again on the footer. And here, the thing we have is actually a component that will wrap around the container, so you can see the container inside of it. And this allows us to do full width backgrounds, right? They span the entire screen. And if this was flipped, we could only add the background to the blue area of the container. So this particular background is not super obvious. Maybe on dark is a little more obvious. You can see a little light coming from there. But maybe I could do something a little more drastic and remove that effect and just add a background color here. We could do background, I don't know, let's do color emerald 50, something like that. And you can see that the container, the background color applies to the entire width of the website. And this having not have, like, if you have a single container, you can't do this, right? Because the background wouldn't span the entire width of the website. So that's why it's generally a good idea to use multiple containers and to allow each section to kind of control itself in terms of when it applies the container. Like maybe if you want a full width background, this is just a single color, but you could do effects, you could do a canvas, like an animated canvas, you could do a bunch of stuff. And the container needs to go inside of that so that it can have this effect around it. All right. So let's go back. Let's go back to container. Oh, by the way, I'm on localhost, but this is everything is online on VerveUI.pro. Just doing localhost because there's a little bug here with this number. The online version is 6, and I updated this to 14. Well, I'll show you that in a second. Anyway, so this is the container. We can click this checkbox to see margins, padding, and content. And like I said, there's a bunch of containers here. There's 4. So how does this work? Well, the container has, this particular component has a fluid margin, which means that it goes, so there's a website max width and a website min width, and it goes, the padding goes from 32 pixels when the website is in full width to 14 pixels when the website is on min width, right? So if you look at the green area, because we can see the orange area, it means it's already on full width, right? So we can change that, right? We can increase the max width of the website or decrease it, right, to whatever value we want. Like we could do 1.2 1.2K, and it would, it's like it wouldn't grow past this value. But then on whatever value you set there, we can manipulate the min and max padding. So the max padding is the one that applies on full width. So we could decrease it, we could increase it. Now, obviously, if your viewport goes past this value, the max width doesn't matter because it's just like going over the margin, right? But let me refresh this so we can have the original one. But once your viewport matches the max width, so something along these lines, now it matters, because when you start to decrease from here on out, it's important to keep the spacing, and this is where you can control. So the max width is around here, sort of, and then you can decide whatever. Min, actually, you can't go below 14 because this is the min, right? So you can decide any value between your max and your min. And then same thing if you go to min width. So if we set 320, there we go. This would be the min width, which is 14. And of course we can also set more or less for this. We can control this, just 8, 6, whatever. All right, so that's a container, and those are the 4 values that control the container. So after this one, we have the flex. The reason why I think the container is a pretty obvious layout component to have. And the reason I decided to have a container is because it's much easier for me to see this in code than to just see a bunch of classes. And the classes for this particular one, you can see them here. So seeing this applied on a class name is much harder to see than just the container component. And also, if you use React DevTools, like if you go here, let me put this down. Come on. It doesn't allow me to right click this thing. Okay, maybe I could do it here. Buggy Chrome. Come on, man. Okay, I guess this is some sort of bug here. Maybe I could do it here. It's not working. I can't pull up React DevTools. But anyway, if you have React DevTools, then you can actually see the container component, right? Which is easier than to just see yet another div with a bunch of class names. All right, so and that's kind of the same criteria for the flex, the grid, well, all of them really. I guess except the visually hidden, because the visually hidden component actually has a bunch of styles, not classes. That's a special case. All right, so I just want to show you the flex and then a few tips on how to use the other ones. Let me show you the difference between using a flex. So let's take a component. Let's take a div that has a flex class on it, and let me show you how to replace that with a flex component. So I have a code block component here, and there's this div, right? And the only way we know that this div is actually applying the flex layout is if we inspect the flex, inspect the class names and read this flex here. So a better way of doing this is to just transform this into a flex component. And then it has justify center, between, and item center. So we don't need this anymore. And this is easier to read. It's like, oh, it's a flex, okay. Justify between item center, and then it has some background. And we could actually take a look at this code block. So this is actually this component right here. So this one is for the header. So it's actually this part here. Yep, it's this one. It's doing the same thing, right? It's like nothing changed. So in terms of the HTML that's outputted, everything's the same. It's just a little easier to read when you scan the code. It's like, oh, there's a flex here. Okay, it goes until there. There's another one here. So this would be pretty easy too. You could just do flex. And then that would be, which one is this? It's the one after. So it's this one. And again, everything just looks the same. Yeah, so this makes things a little bit easier to scan. Same thing for the grid, except the grid. So the flex just has justify between items and a gap. I think that's all it has. You can check it out actually. Oh, it also has orientation, inline, and wrap, and then of course class names that override whatever you want, including the flex itself. So sometimes you have like you want this to be a flex, but then after a certain breakpoint you want to go, okay, no, actually this is a grid, right? And that totally works, right? So of course this is now kind of weird because it transformed into a grid. But oh, not here. But this works. It kind of makes it obvious that this is a flex. So this would be kind of a mobile first approach where, okay, on small screens this is a flex, but then from a given point onwards, like small, medium, large, whatever, it becomes a grid. So that makes things a little easier. Okay. All right, so time for some coffee now. All right. Then we kind of have the same thing for the grid, except the grid has rows and columns and rows, and there's a gap on the X, a gap on the Y. I can actually show you that real quick. So the grid component is here. So we got rows and calls. We got the justify on the main axis, the alignment on the main axis, the alignment on the cross axis, and then a gap for the X and the Y. Well, in truth, this is the gap on the main axis and the gap on the cross axis. But I didn't really want it to write gap main and gap cross. That would be weird. So just kind of left it at X and Y, and then you can think about the main axis as the X, and then if you decide that this would be that you would change the normal direction, which is usually from left to right, then it would go from top to bottom. Then you kind of can think about it as just flipping the entire coordinate space, and the X goes down and the Y goes to the right. But one of the things that I did here, both with the flex and the grid components, is that I've purposefully removed non-accessible features, CSS features. And you go like, what the hell are non-accessible CSS features? Actually, I think there's a link here somewhere. I should have a link here. I'll put it up. Oh, I have it here. So let me show you what that is. Ooh. Oh, okay, yeah. The link is correct. It's just because I'm on localhost, this is not working. Or maybe the link is not correct. Let me take a look. Yeah, the link is wrong. Damn it. I have to fix that. So there's actually a dark side of the grid in Flexbox. And the point here is you shouldn't change the visual, you shouldn't disconnect the visual order from the DOM order. And that's what happens when you use some of the features on the Flexbox and the grid. So there's the grid auto flow row dense and the grid auto flow call dense. You have you could also disconnect the DOM order from the visual order with grid template areas. And in terms of the flex, there's the flex direction row reverse and flex direction call reverse. So I remove these from the flex and from the grid because these are bad for accessibility. And the reason is very simple, is that when a screen reader is reading the website, it reads things in DOM order, not in visual order. And if you if you disconnect those, it's going to be fairly confusing for whoever's listening to the screen readers. Like they will not understand that DOM order, and that it will break expectations. So that's bad for accessibility. You can also screw that up with position absolute, but I explained things in this article, so feel free to. Here's the URL. Feel free to take a look at that and see what's up with that. And I was mentioning that as also to explain why I decided to call this gap X and gap Y. It's because you shouldn't change this order. So X will always be left to right and Y will always be top to bottom. Okay, enough about flex and grid. The sticky component is a pretty obvious one. It just sticks to the top of a container. But I feel like I should talk about this a little bit because a lot of developers get stuck with the sticky component. And the reason why is because the thing you have to understand with sticky, and by the way, the sticky component is kind of ridiculously simple. It literally just has a sticky class, and this is not a class like, let me show you. This is not a class like the container has a class of container, and then the container class has utility classes on it. No, the sticky component actually has a utility class directly. So this is just a Tailwind class, utility class, and it just says this. I think is it display or position? I don't actually remember. Let me check that out real quick. It's position sticky. All right. So how does this work? So these elements here, the A and the B, they're using the sticky component around them. You can see them here, right? So we have sections, and then there's a list of contacts, and there's a sticky around the H2s, and the H2s just have the letters, right? And if we scroll down, they just stick to the viewport, and then they're replaced with some other component that goes on top of them. They're all there. It's just that they're stacked. So the M will go over the L, the N will go over the M, so on and so forth. And you can see where when you scroll down the contact list, you can see which letter you're on. All right, so this is the sticky component, pretty straightforward. All right. And we've got the separator. Separator is pretty easy peasy. It's just the reason why we need a separator component is that horizontal separators can be built with the HTML HR element. However, there's no separator for there's no vertical separator, right? So this is an accessible implementation of a separator that supports also purely decorative separators. That means that they're removed from the accessibility tree and can be styled as needed. But some of them are important for accessibility. It's like, okay, there's a separator here, and this is one type of content, this is another type of content. And sometimes they're purely visual. So for example, in here, we would be separating some piece of content from navigation, for example. So this particular separator, the horizontal one, is a semantic separator. So it's not purely visual. While these here, the vertical ones, are purely visual. So they will not be announced to the screen readers. Yeah. So that's the separator component. And then we have the aspect ratio, where this just allows you to set something inside of it with a particular aspect ratio that you define, some arbitrary ratio. And usually this is used for images and videos and stuff like that. So it displays on the right ratio. And if you resize, so we have this image in 16:9, and if we resize this, it will always be in that ratio. Works pretty well. And then finally, we have the visually hidden component, which just hides its children visually, but it keeps things on the accessibility tree, right? So it's just a visual thing. So this would typically be used to either visually hide labels while keeping them accessible for screen readers. So for example, if you have a form and the placeholders of the inputs kind of do the job of the labels, then you might make that design decision and just hide the labels, but they're still accessible for screen readers. Or when you want to take advantage of some native element like checkboxes, radio buttons, and other kinds of inputs, but then you actually need to visually replace them with something that's a little more beautiful, right? And this is actually very common, this use case. And that's why you would use the visually hidden component. This is actually just an export of that thing, of the React area visually hidden component. All right, so these are the layout components. Like from my experience. So I built them, and then I'm replacing the the divs on the entire website with these components. And let me tell you, it's so much faster to scan the codes. Like, okay, there's a flex there, there's a grid there, there's a separator there, and instead of just being all divs with a bunch of class names inside of them, this just makes things a lot easier. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this one. See you on the next one.